welcome along to the next instalment of our New Year's campaign. It's 3 things that landlords need to pay attention to in 2018. And joining me now to share his views is Upad mainman James Davis. And James, I'm so glad to have your input here because Upad has always been a lighthouse to landlords, supporting them. So I think it's great to get your views. And I think just to start, I guess we know that 2018 is going to be quite a challenging year for landlords.
Happy New Year, and I think it's going to be challenging and also quite exciting. I see the further professionalisation of the rental market. I hope this will be the year that no journalist ever uses that photo of the young ones, and we move on to proper stuff.
Excellent. So we're going to move on now to your 3 things that you think landlords need to pay attention to. So what's your number 1?
So I didn't realise I had to put them in order as well. So the first one is about the rental price. Not so much about against the market, but there's been so much commentary last year about mortgage interest relief coming in. And everybody from surveys we've done and other things was the higher taxes landlords were going to be having to pay on our interest payments. The general consensus is that landlords were going to increase their rent to cover their increased costs. I think, however, this differs enormously from when the price of oil increases, petrol at the pump increases. I think it's a very different example. And what I mean by that is approximately half of all landlords have no debt, no mortgage on their rental property. Those that do have debt, it's only the minority of them that have a 65% or more loan to value. So it's only a very small percentage of landlords that have a high loan to value, which means they're going to have a higher tax bill compared to previous years. For those people that fall into that category, the idea that you could just increase your rental price, I think is very much a false economy, because everybody you're competing with, 75% plus of all other landlords, have no need to. They haven't had higher costs. So it's almost when your ad appears on Rightmove and Zoopla, which is where 92% of all tenants are looking for their next rental, your ad is going to be priced 10%, 20% more than all the others in your locality. Will you get any inquiries then? No. So you've got to make sure you're pricing your property at the market rate and not just think that you can pass on your own increased costs when the other people around you that are letting out properties on the same street have no need to. You're going to price yourself out of the market and you're going to have a whole load of voids all the way through to the spring.
Totally agree with you 100% there, James. I think that landlords can't just think that one sort of retort to Section 24 is just to put up rents, because as you've clearly explained, that it just doesn't work like that. So, to my mind, they've got to think of other ways to combat Section 24. Is that your second point?
Which neatly flows into. So, as a landlord, the 3 biggest costs we have. First is taxation, which you can't really do anything about. The second is void periods, and the third is letting agency fees. So, if we know the first one is likely to go up, more so depending on where you are on the amount of debt you have. The bit with void periods that I cannot get my head around is we all know that the market is out of equilibrium between supply and demand. We all know there's more tenants than there are properties. So why should any of us really be having any void periods? And I think this is because of the channels that landlords are using to look for their next tenant. So I'm going to have a little dig at those people that still use classified ads in local newspapers. 92% of all tenants are now looking online. You might as well put an ad in a box in your attic. Nobody's going to see it in a local newspaper. But they will do if you see it on Rightmove and Zoopla. But it's also about how it looks on Rightmove and Zoopla, which is my presentation bit, in that when your ad goes live, how it looks is absolutely imperative. Hopefully everybody's not still hungover and so on from the Christmas period and can remember this stat. But when your ad goes on Rightmove and Zoopla, you will get approximately a third of all of your inquiries in the first 48 hours that your ad goes live. And the science as to why is because that's when it's at the top of that first page of results. A bit like Google, it's rare that you ever go off that first page. So don't blow that opportunity. Use it to make sure your ad looks amazing. You've got really good photographs. There isn't a picture of you in the mirror in that bedroom, or dirty washing littered everywhere, or stains, or it's dark. It's how your property looks, and it's the shop window for your property that people see first. So get it right first time round. That standout factor is absolutely imperative.
Mm-hmm. And Indeed. And what about the sort of cost aspects for landlords in terms of mitigating Section 24? Because, they should be looking at ways if they can reduce costs, if they feel that they're going to be impacted.
Yeah, so we have a variety of packages for landlord. We have Upad standard, which is £120 to advertise your property on Rightmove and Zoopla, which is where tenants are looking for their next rental. My view is you need to be advertising on those sites to reduce that void periods we mentioned earlier. It's nonsense any of us have any voids, and there's no need to pay that 8 to 10% that historically we did to access Rightmove and Zoopla, because companies like Upad now exist that allow you to go onto those sites with stuff like we operate 24 hours a day to react to the fact that the market operates as such too.
Indeed. So your final thing that landlords need to pay attention to in 2018?
Is compliance.
Yep.
And the reason I mention this is that when I started as a landlord many years ago, less grey hair and all of that, there was quite a lot of legislation, and now there is a whole lot more. And I almost think that I can envisage lots of landlords making the mistake of wanting to evict your tenants either because they've missed 2 rent payments or just wanting the property back, having to go to court, and that process is already quite expensive. It's quite hassle factory, and it's quite time consuming. But to get all the way to court and then for the court to go, hang on a minute, you haven't served the government rental booklet, you haven't given your tenant a copy of the gas certificate, and you can't prove that either, and they throw it out, and it's a snakes and ladders game. You go down all the way back to the start line and have to go through that whole process. So one of the big changes has been about ensuring that you've given your tenants the right documentation at the start of the tenancy. Upad have built a facility in order to manage that for you, but also importantly to get the confirmation back from tenants that they've actually received all this documentation, because the court will not just take your word for the fact that you put it through the letterbox. You've got to be able to prove that as well, and in your console on Upad you'll be able to see that information has been served, and that is your ticket, as it were, to show to the courts that you've served the information and you can prove the fact that they've received it, and then move to the next phase as you're going through that eviction process, for example.
Yeah. Well, fantastic. I guess just to finish, we both believe that the government is seeking to professionalise the sector. I think we will see more of that in 2018. And I've recently discovered that there are now 160 government statutes and regulations that landlords need to adhere to in order to be compliant. So I would finish this, James. I'm sure you probably agree with me that this year has got to be about prevention rather than cure. I think landlords are going to have to be much more informed and educated, and that's going to help them survive the challenges.
Look, it may be me, it may be everybody, but I'm quite a simple guy, and there's a limit to how much I can keep in my head. My laptop is increasingly my brain, and I cannot keep on top of all the legislation and the new stuff that is coming about and all the amendments. Logic says you'll drop a ball somewhere along the line. I think having resources that you can go to that are supporting you, offering you guidance, ensuring that you're following the right footsteps is ever so important. And I think it's generally a good thing of all the changes that have been coming about that is professionalising the space. But there's just so many pitfalls, and I'll leave with this that I've found out fairly recently, is we all know we've got to have smoke alarms in our property. I won't go on about where and so on, but we all know we've got to have smoke alarms. And I was one, historically, used to test it by just putting my thumb in to make sure it made the noise and it was working. But it was only fairly recently I found out that actually that doesn't work anymore. What it needs to be is that it was working on the first day of the tenancy agreement, and not only that, but the tenants or a third party, like an inventory clerk, has actually done the check for you, so that should there be a fire in the unlikely event, you've got a third party that says it was working on the start of the tenancy, or your tenants have given you a piece of paper which they've signed to say it was working, rather than just your word. And I think the big bit with compliance is a phrase called the burden of proof. Yeah. The burden of proof falls on us as landlords to ensure we've done what we need to be doing. And just having your word for it will not suffice. And that's where, as landlords, we need to up our game for the rest of this year.
Well, fantastic. Thank you so much for your input, James. It's always great to hear from you because you've got your landlord hat on and you've got your Upad hat on as well. So you see a wide spectrum of issues for landlords. And just very quickly, are you feeling positive about buy-to-let in 2018? Are you going to keep the faith?
Yeah, I've got very few reasons not to be. You know, it's a long-term game. I've never been into flipping. Or anything else. You know, this is a long-term project, like it should be, and is the case for most landlords. I want to make sure I'm being compliant. I want to make sure my property's let the whole time. The amount of hassle factor I get now and voids compared to several years ago is very different. Yes, there's changes from a tax perspective, but ultimately the sums still work out, and compared to other asset classes, you know, it stacks up quite well. So I'm very positive about it, and I continue to believe it'll be a sector that grows and develops over the coming years.
Well, it's always fantastic to end on a positive note, so thank you so much for joining me here, and good luck for 2018 with all your endeavours. Thanks very much, James.
Thanks, Vanessa, and to you all at PT too.
Thank you.